Rai, he's all in. And after every game, every parent comes up and says that. I love how Rai is all in because it shows up in the way that he plays. Shows up on who he is every day when he shows up on that field. And as I was thinking about this topic, I was reflecting on how impressive it is that other people recognize his commitment to being all in when he's on that field. Because it's easy to back off. It's easy to be afraid in the moment. It's easy to be like, I think I'm gonna get knocked down. And I promise you, he gets knocked down all the time. All the time, he gets knocked down. And he gets back up and he goes all in any of those given moments. Now, if you were to think about Rai and you would think about him playing at the collegiate level of soccer, you would assume this natural path that it was easy. And that arriving there and watching him play today, as fun as it is, that there were no issues along the path to him getting there. And that would also not be true. And I believe when we think about being all in, we are also faced with things where it was an imperfect path that was not a straight line and that was full of all sorts of barriers that we had to overcome. So I want to talk to you today about 3 ideas that I want you to think about what it means to be all in. The first one I'm going to define as grit. And if you follow grit at all, grit is the definition of passion and perseverance at the exact same moment. So in the context of Rai, when you think about grit, over the last 3 years, he had to overcome a broken sesamoid, which took him a year and probably an unknown future. And instead of having surgery, he got it repaired. He had a bone bruise that took him a year. He also had to try out to be on the team because he didn't commit prior to graduation. There were 120 kids that tried out, and they took 2. Think about all the barriers that you have to overcome. We are all faced with those, and it requires us to have grit. I want to share a couple of thoughts about this. So this is a photo from only a few days ago, and I want to talk about the fact that a part of grit is this idea that when you have grit, you break barriers. So it was the Women Tech Awards on Thursday, and this is a picture of all of these women who I would say have had grit at every stage of their career, despite significant challenges that they were faced with. Ruth Novak, she's 4th over from, I think your screen might reverse. She's 4th in from the right side. She spent 50 years in STEM, and she was one of the original women who would have been at the same time as Hidden Figures, as an aerospace engineer, one of the only women in the room at that point in time in her career. And she had to break immense barriers to spend 50 years at Hercules and Thiokol and eventually into Northrop Grumman. There are other women whose stories that we heard. One of the women in the Women Tech Award finalists, she came to America with $70 in her bank account. She started school at BYU. She started working as a janitor, and she didn't know if she would make it past a semester. She did well enough in her grades that she got a full ride scholarship, so her $3.50 janitor job could pay for her housing so she could finish her degree. And today she both has a master's and she's written books. And the thing that I know about grit is that it requires you to dig really deep. Requires you to, when faced with what are almost Herculean barriers that you might not be able to overcome, that you step into them, you navigate them, and you commit all in. And I can promise you that every one of these women who have had to break the glass ceiling in the world of STEM has done that in their life, and they have faced significant barriers along the way. For all of us, being all in means we'll face barriers. It's not an easy path in order to go all in and to do the things that we want to accomplish. I also believe that if you have grit, you can truly change the future. So 2 months ago, I had an opportunity to be in Tanzania in Africa and go with an NGO and teach a bunch of young women. Most of these young women came from villages that are extremely poor. When we walked down the streets to see the businesses that they were thinking of being like, they were literally shacks with tin walls and dirt floors, and they did have Instagram and Facebook logos above their signs. But what was fascinating is all of these young women were coming to a class that we were teaching where they were trying to change their future. They were trying to get out of poverty. They were trying to change the next generation, and they were doing so in their own time and in their own commitment and to change the opportunities for their families. We saw this time and time again for these young women and others who went all in on committing to change. One of the women in the photo, 30 years ago, she went to Tanzania and decided she would be all in on changing the future of children and women in Tanzania. And she sold everything. She knew not one person in Africa. She moved to Africa, and she decided that she would adopt kids who were orphans. And she put them in an orphanage, and she has stayed with them for all 25 years. She's paid for their education. She's paid for their housing. She's been there for every medical issue. And if you want a woman who has been all in, it's her. And you know what? Every one of those kids is now in the process of graduating from college and will completely change their future, which is amazing. I believe that grit tied to this theme, this passion and perseverance, it allows us to change the future for people. You think about a world that looks different from the world that we look in, and I think of it often coming out of being a woman in STEM. There were 3 women in my graduating computer science class. I've often been the only woman in the room, and I don't want that to be true anymore. I just want to change the landscape. 50% of our workforce are women. I want 50% of the people in tech to be women. And it requires us to take what we believe and put it all out there and make a difference and create change. And I believe that's one of the things that when we truly have grit, it enables us to do. I also think grit is our ability to solve problems. I actually often say the #1 skill set I hire for is people who are problem solvers, creative problem solvers, that when faced with whatever the challenge is, that they solve problems. Because in running and building businesses, every day there is a crisis. Like I woke up this morning, I can promise you there are already 10 crises that happened. Right? It is the nature of building great things. Something's always going wrong, something doesn't look like what we woke up to. And so now we have an opportunity to figure out how we will attack that. So as mentioned, I built a company called 3D Plus Me, and we can make you Iron Man, which is a really fun thing to be able to do. We partnered with Marvel and with Star Wars, with the NFL, Major League Baseball. We could scan your face. You could buy yourself as a 3D printed collectible, or eventually Hasbro built a toy line. So you could become a posable action figure. And I can promise you it's very cool to be like Iron Man and have your helmet come up and see your face. Or the Stormtrooper when like the helmet reveal comes off. It really is magical. Like everyone needs that experience. So we had been building this company. And it's a startup company, so we're just along the way. And Superhero September was always a big time in the ecosystem. And we had been working on a really large deal to launch the program Super Awesome Me, which was the personalized superhero line. And we had a specific deal that we had done that integrated Marvel and Hasbro and Target and launched for the holiday season at Target across the country. Well, it just so happens that about 2 weeks before we were set to do the install, I got a call from one of my suppliers who said, and we'd been working on this for like 7 months, and they said, "Hey, Sid, we're not going to hit your timeline. We're backing out." And we had literally signed the contract with Target maybe a week before. And they made this call to me, of course, on a Friday night at 5 o'clock. So I walked back into the office on Monday morning, right, racking my brain about what we would be able to do. And I walked into the office and I pulled everyone into the conference room and I said, "Okay, guys, I might be asking you to do the impossible, but can we brainstorm every possible solution to solving this problem to see if we might be able to salvage the install?" And everyone around the room had a mindset of we are going to go all in on trying to solve this. Every person around the table, we listed probably 30 ideas on the whiteboard, some of them seemingly impossible and were never going to happen, but it didn't matter. Every brainstorm was on the table. And then we started going down them and figuring out what was going to be possible to do or to not do. Over the course of the next 2 weeks, we actually completed what we needed to do and missed our install date by only 1 day. As I think back on that, I'm actually not sure how we only missed our install date on 1 day. That's actually a common theme through all that. When I think back on it, what I recognize is that it comes because a group of people were fully committed. That it wasn't going to look like what we imagined 2 weeks before, but we were going to be able to solve really big problems that we faced by committing together, by exploring those opportunities, by being willing to be creative in the moment and letting what we believed in our hearts was possible to come to fruition. And we did it. And I can also tell you it required 150 family members and every possible solution that you can imagine to pull that off. This is actually a picture of the warehouse after we finished assembling them all, before we loaded them on a truck to head to California to Target. And I think that is, like, when I look at that picture, I am flooded with the memories of all of the people who stood in a place of being fully committed, of solving the problems that were ahead of us and being willing to do those things. And I think that that is one really important tenet of being all in, is this idea of grit. The next one that I want to talk to you about is this idea of opportunity. When I think about it, opportunities come in all different shapes and sizes. And if you want to go and do something, you have to be willing to both grant and take advantage of opportunities that come your way. I think both are very, very important. So it was mentioned that I had an opportunity to go work at Disney. Let me tell you how that experience came about. I have a good friend, and he was a colleague previously. And on one day in September, he made a phone call to me. And he said, Cyd, I've got this opportunity sitting here in Imagineering. It's a brand new position, and I think you should come down and you should talk to us about it. And I want to pause on that for just one moment. It wasn't really hard for Tom to give me a call, but he had to make the phone call. And sometimes I think we can be more aware of opportunities and doors we can open for other people in order to give them opportunities to go all in. In this case, it required a phone call from Tom that wasn't much effort for him to say, hey, Cyd, will you come down and will you interview for this job? He opened a door for me, and then I had the responsibility to figure out what I was going to do from there. So I flew down to California, and I flew back, and Tom called me, and he's like, hey, Cyd, we totally want you to come work with us, which I thought was a really great thing. And then he said, look, this is a brand new job. We've never hired anyone into this position before. I don't know how long it will be for. I don't know if it's a position that you'll have for 3 months or 6 months. I don't know all the projects that you'll work on. I can't even tell you exactly when it's going to look like because it's new, but I totally think you should do it. And that was the phone call I got. I promise you, it only took me 3 seconds. Because I also knew I was never gonna get that phone call again. There was no other time in my career where I was gonna get the phone call from him to jump in and take advantage of the opportunity. It also took a risk. I was also taking a risk on my part. I had to jump in, I had to take this opportunity, and I had to see where it was going to lead. Now, I ended up staying there for just under 6 years. And the orchestration of that own opportunity, where Tom opened one door, and I think that everyone in this room has a unique place that you sit to open doors like that for other people, if you think about it. You can open more doors than you can possibly imagine, I promise you. And it takes small, tiny efforts, like picking up the phone and making a phone call. And then on the other side of it, it takes the commitment of the individual to jump into the opportunity. Because this opportunity was ill-defined, they didn't know exactly what they needed, except for they knew people who knew tech and entrepreneurship to jump into this role. Therefore, it also meant it was completely in my control what was going to happen. If I didn't step all the way in, if I didn't go and commit myself to figuring out paths, to making great things happen, I would have walked away probably in 3 months. There was no one to tell me what to do. There was no one to tell me the project that I was going to work on. It was entirely up to me how that was going to turn out. I think that's the thing with opportunities. Doors get open, and the way you walk through the door and show up is in our own control. And that is one thing that's required when you think about how you make a difference and the path that you are on. I've had this opportunity to do this many times in my career, and I'm going to share just a couple of other examples. So as a woman raising venture capital, I only have a 3% chance to raise venture capital. Now, raising capital for anyone is hard, so I'm just gonna say that's also true. And also, I know math. So I'm like, okay, I get it, 3%, right? I have to do a lot of meetings in order to be able to get funded. The problem is, people fail to tell you how many times you have to get rejected to get to the 3%. They just tell you you have the 3% shot. And so sometimes opportunities are also really hard. And one of the particular times when I was raising capital, that 97% of rejection sometimes seemed impossible to overcome. It seemed impossible to find the people who would fund the thing that I was in front of in order to be able to make that thing possible. Because I got all of those rejections. There was a point at time where I was like, I can't answer any phone calls before I get to the office because I'm pretty sure it's someone who's going to reject me. That's a really difficult place. But no, despite that, you have to stand in a place of trying to find every solution possible and break down every barrier until you get to the end. What I find happens is that along the way, a different door opens and a different path is taken, and some outcome occurs that is the path that you're supposed to be on. But it doesn't come without a lot of things that are hard along the way. I don't know anyone who has everything easy, even though we look at our Instagram profiles and we say everyone is living their most perfect life. There are very difficult journeys along the way in building companies, in building teams, and in finding success that require what we're talking about today. I'm also a big believer that you have to individually believe all in on whatever you're doing. Whatever the thing is you want to accomplish, if you are not confident that you can do it, even though sometimes we second guess ourselves, you will never get to the outcome that you want. I remember a few years ago, when I was building one of my companies, I used to travel often with the president of a Fortune 10 company. And I was always going into the C-suite meetings and we were pitching together. We walked into a meeting with the CIO of one of the major airlines. And we walked out and in the course of the meeting, we presented it was all about digital transformation, right? Like what's happening in the physical, the digital world, and how the world was transforming and the impact. And we had this great conversation and we had teed up, we understood all of their challenges. And in the meeting, I remember feeling like she didn't believe that there was going to be able to be a transformation of their business. And that the barriers to them getting there were so large that it felt like the organization was never going to move. We walked out of that meeting, we looked at each other and we said, they're probably never going to get there. They're never going to hit the level of transformation they want as a company that will translate into the success of their business because the people around the table don't believe. They don't believe it's possible. They believe it's too large. It feels overwhelming. And what was fascinating is every person in the company also represented that same feeling every time. Every person that you talked to felt overwhelmed. They felt like the task was impossible. They felt like they couldn't overcome and deliver on what they needed to do. That's what happens when we don't believe. We have to believe in where we're headed. And then even when it changes, which is totally fine, you have to believe the next path forward every time. In addition to that, I believe you have to not just believe, but you have to commit. You have to spend your energy doing things that you're willing to make a difference and that you're willing to do. A couple of years ago, almost 2 years ago exactly, I had the opportunity to join James Clark in building Brandless. And I was coming off another company. I was trying to figure out what to do with my life, which is a common theme. Like, what should I be doing? Where should I be spending my time? How should I be making a difference? And James called me and we started talking about a company, Brandless, that he had just acquired and that he was restructuring. And I was faced again with that moment in time where I had to decide what I was willing to commit to. This is what I've decided. You commit to things where there are amazing people who support you in order to get great things done. Sometimes we step into roles, or I've stepped into roles, where the people behind me weren't as committed as I was to the role. It never plays well. You never get the outcome that you want. You never get the result that you want. If you're going to commit to things, the most important thing we can do is surround ourselves with amazing team players and people who will stand by our side and make a difference and allow us to be successful. One of the most fascinating things about the Brandless journey, and just mentioning James Clark for a moment, is I'm actually not sure I've ever worked for a male ally who has been as supportive as James, who has been willing to step into the place and open other doors and give more opportunity to build and accelerate the company. That's an interesting challenge for all of us. Would other people around us say we are their most important allies? Like, we need people who are our most important allies to become successful. So one of the things I would challenge each of you, how are you showing up? How are you being the ally for the people around you, opening doors, creating opportunity, and making sure that they have the best shot at success? That's what it means to commit. It doesn't mean just to say something. It means your actions follow what you promise and what you say. That's what it means to actually support someone. And I think sometimes we just think it's like, good job, I've got your back. It doesn't mean that. It means you step in, you open the doors, you put people out front, you support them, and you defend them. And we should all do that every day. And when we do, we change the world around us because of how we embrace what's possible. The next idea that I want to leave you with is this idea of disruption. I think people who are really great at being all in are also not afraid to create disruption. They're willing, like when Ryan steps on the field, he's gonna disrupt every play. He's gonna frustrate the other team every time because he just creates this energy level that is different than everyone else on the team. He's willing to step in and get knocked around, and it's really, truly disruptive. They talk about that when the guys are commentating on the live streams, that there's this disruptive force. I want you to think about that for a moment. Are you willing to be a disruptive force for good? Are you willing to step into a space that says, yeah, I'm gonna go mix that up. I'm gonna change that because change is the way that we create better outcomes. Are we willing to be that force? It's actually hard to be the disruptive force because all the eyes are on you. They put a spotlight on what you're willing to do. But I think disruption is one of the most powerful parts of how we change the world and how we commit to do things. So as mentioned, I had the opportunity to be at Disney. How many of you have seen World of Color? Yeah, I love World of Color. It's like the Bellagio on steroids. That's how I describe it. You got like fire and screens and all sorts of things. And one of the projects that I worked on was this project that you're watching here. So kind of like watch the Mickey ear hats as I explain this. So we used to do these really cool R&D open houses in Imagineering. And so every year we'd take 50 to 60 of our spectacular R&D initiatives and we would bring them into an open house. And they're all projects you will never see in general, because they were thinking about what would be possible if we solved this problem. How would it transform the guest experience? Have any of you been to Florida and worn the magic bands? Maybe some of you. Okay, more people headed to Florida. Okay, so there's a magic band. This was a project that was also highly disruptive. But at Disney, everything was about disruption. We actually had a team called the Blue Sky Team. The Blue Sky Team, their responsibility every day was to think about how we can change the world, how we can make guest experiences more magical. In the case of this one, we wanted to think about how you could make guests who come to the theme park more immersed in the nighttime spectaculars, not just a watcher, but an actual participant in a show. We wanted you to like step into the show and have this magical transformative experience. So we started thinking about ways you could do that. One of the ways that we thought about is, wonder if we take our Glow merchandise and we synchronize it to the show control systems. So we decided that we should put big IR systems up and we should make Mickey hats that are programmable. And when you watch the show, they synchronize with the entertainment system. So we had this vision and we showed it. And then Bob Iger came through and he's like, oh, I think we should launch this in like 7 months. And we actually did. We launched it for the opening of Cars Land. And then we took it all over the world to the cruise lines and all of the theme parks. The coolest part about that experience was there was this place that you could envision what was possible, that you could disrupt what might have just been the status quo. You could invent it, you could be creative, and then you could change the experience for every guest that came into the theme parks. That was really powerful. When I was standing on the bridge, when we had that opening night, you literally had chills going up and down because so magical to see this immersive experience of people participating. That's the feeling that you get when you create disruption that makes a difference. And of course, this isn't an entertainment thing and I'm standing at Disneyland, but the opportunity that you have to put people in stories and for a moment they forget all of their other cares and they're making memories with their families, it was the core to our mission. And we got to see how that could become possible every second of every day. That's part of what it takes to be able to be all in and make these things happen. I'm also a big believer that you have to be willing to activate. It's actually my favorite strength in all of the strength finders because it's this idea that you can take an idea and you can turn it into action. There's lots of people with big ideas. There's lots of people that can do work. There are not as many people who can take an idea, figure out all the trade-offs, and make something happen. It's a much harder talent to be able to have. So you think about, what are you committed to? What are you willing to do? What space do you want to step into? The other question you have to ask is, how far are you willing to go? Are you willing to be the activator? Are you willing to not only like sit in the room and write the song, but take it all the way to releasing it? Because it's easy to do the first part. It's hard to do the rest of the work. And that shows up for all of us individually, time and time again in our lives and in our careers. We have ideas, and are we willing to take them all of the way into action and make a difference? That is the magical ingredient in making things happen. That one superpower of being able to take ideas and do that. And sometimes the ideas are bad ideas and they fail. That's also okay. Because with those failures and with those imperfect roads comes learnings that you will never have in front of you if you don't simply step into that. Give you one quick story on this one. So back to my superhero business, because it has great stories and great products. We had launched originally at Comic-Con. Also, Comic-Con in San Diego is the best Comic-Con ever, if you ever want to go to a Comic-Con. And we had this scanning booth, and Marvel was there, and you could become a superhero. And right after the event, this was at the end of June, I get a call after the conference, and Walmart calls me, and they're like, hey, Sid, do you think you can launch, how many stores can you launch in for Superhero September? Also, that was 60 days away. And I'm like, well, first of all, I said, how many can you pay me for? That was the first answer. The second answer was, let me see what that means. And so we started exploring it. Well, quickly, I realized that my product price point of like $130 was never going to sell in Walmart, because Walmart's target market was going to need something sub 50. I also decided that I didn't know how to do that with straight 3D printing, so I was going to need a toy line. That was going to require Hasbro, who holds the global toy license. Well, I didn't know anyone at Hasbro that day, but soon we found the person at Hasbro, picked up the phone, called them, and somehow convinced them to let us build a superhero line in 45 days. Which I still, actually, whenever I tell this story, I still don't know how we did that, to be perfectly honest. So we started down this path of building scanning stations, deploying into Walmart, and it required a whole bunch of crazy things along the path. Because do you know what things I knew? Walmart was never calling me again. I had one shot at Superhero September. If I didn't say yes, they were not going to call me back next year. That's just the game that we're in when building businesses. Opportunity comes, you get an opportunity to activate. So I was like, and generally, if you can't tell, I'm always all in. I'm like, yep, we should totally do that. I just don't know what that will mean. So in the course of activating on this one, it actually required us to order, we had Hasbro send us action figures. We had to pop off the heads of all the action figures, replace them with the 3D printed one, repackage them, and ship them to customers. And I still have all the heads at my house. Anyone wants to see them? Not getting rid of them. They represent this commitment to making that project happen. I do. I got a lot of like Captain America and Iron Man heads. If anyone needs to borrow some, you can just let me know. But for me, as I look back on that, it was seriously a 60-day program. We had to scan heads, we had to build scanners, we had to deploy them into Walmart, we had to come up with a product, we had to get license agreements done, and we launched in September. That's all of our challenge. When faced with opportunity, are you willing to activate? Thank you, Lindsay. And sometimes when we're willing to jump in and be disruptors and do things that no one else will do, let's see if this video will play. Will you hit make sure the video should play, hopefully? If not, I'm going to tell you this story. Okay, so while this video is playing, I'm going to tell you about this experience. When I was building a 3D printing company, I met a gentleman who was running Not Impossible Labs, which is a perfect name for disruption. And the 3D printing was very new, and it was emerging. And we hadn't been able to solve all the problems. And it is actually still emerging today. I still love 3D printing. So this is a guy named Mick, and he decided to fly into the Sudan and see how he could change medical care for some of the children there. So in the Sudan, many children have lost arms or legs because of the mines. So in this case, there's a kid named Daniel in this story who had lost both of his arms from a mine. And for medical care, it's really hard to get prosthetics into places like the Sudan because kids grow really fast. They don't have the infrastructure to continue to provide them. And so Mick decided that he would take down a 3D printer and some computers and go figure out how to make on-demand prosthetics for children who were faced with these issues. So I want you to think about disruption. I want to think about the impact that you can make if you're willing to go outside the lines and try something that no one else has tried. So you can see this hand that was created on the MakerBot. It has working fingers. And what you're going to see from Daniel is this is the first time in 3 years that he was able to feed himself because he didn't have his arms. And it was the first time that he was able to catch a ball or do all of the things that we easily take for granted. But one person was willing to change an environment. One person was willing to step in and imagine what something could be and disrupt all of the things that were around him. And he stepped in, and not only did he change the life for Daniel, he changed the lives for hundreds of kids because they left the equipment there. They trained the nurses and the doctors on how to make these prosthetics. So instead of requiring other infrastructure, it just required more filament for the printer. They had software, they had computers, and they had the ability in order to change the lives of hundreds of thousands of people if it were embraced all over the country. That is the power of disruption. That is the power of being willing to take big ideas, to execute against them, and to change outcomes for people that no one else can possibly change if you don't do them in your own hands. In all of our lives, we have opportunities to be disruptors. We have opportunities to change paths for other people around us. We have opportunities in our industries, in our communities, in our families to address things that we think could be better. And we have this unique responsibility, I believe, to step into those spaces and to do the things that ultimately make a difference for the future generations that are coming. And it requires a combination of skills that aren't just passive. And they're also not easy in the world that we're in today. And we live in a world with tremendous uncertainty. Natalie Gochner often talks about it as, we're in like this perfect cauldron of refining fire as a whole country and a nation and the world right now. But none of that can stop our willingness as individuals to step into a space to make a difference for other people around us, because that's really why we're here. We're here to use those talents to make a difference for other people. And I believe that those journeys also require us to continuously be fearless. A couple of years ago, we had the opportunity to hike the Puerto Moreno Glacier in the Patagonia. And this is one of the few living glaciers in the world. And so as you hike on this glacier, all the ice around you is cracking. And the path for the hike is changing every day. Every time that you step on that glacier, the paths are different because it's calving or there's just cracks, and you hear it when you're in the midst of hiking this glacier. And it's a really profound experience because it frightens you. It makes you afraid of the next step. And then sometimes you look down and there's 300 feet down you is this crevice that you could fall into as you're hiking around this glacier. It's just right there. It's just real. But instead of being afraid and not taking a step forward, you go explore what is happening on that glacier. You're in a unique opportunity to see a world you haven't seen, to explore a place that is not explored often, and to walk away becoming better because of the things that you experienced in that place. When we are all in, we must be fearless. And I don't think fearless means that we have no fear about moments we have to step into. But it means despite that fear, we are willing to take action. We're willing to take the next step. We're willing to look at the danger around us and understand the risk and still move forward. I've often been jealous of other of my colleagues or counterparts who have been completely fearless in their decision-making. Sometimes I think I'm not fearless enough, or that there are other things that I could do to be more fearless. But it's not because we shouldn't have fear. We're going to be afraid of things. We're going to second-guess things that we could step into. It's just human nature. At the end of the day, the thing that matters is what you did when you were fearful. What you did when you weren't sure of the outcome, when we weren't sure where it was going to take us, or where there were greater challenges than you could possibly imagine. That's how we become fearless. That's how we step into the space. That's how we do what we're talking about today, which is in life, in community, in business, and in family. We step all in. And we commit ourselves to do the things that make everyone around us better because of who we are and what we're willing to commit to do. And with that, I'm going to leave you just with one more quote, which is, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit." That is our challenge. What are you willing to repeatedly do? What will you step into? How do you show up every day? How do you forge new paths that have been not possible before in order to make some difference in the world today? Because when I look at a group like this, and I look at all of our collective energy, when we are all doing things that are a force for good, the outcome impact is massive. A couple of days ago, I was in an event where we were talking about how does Utah stop being the 48th state on ranking for women. And the number one, and then everyone in that room, what was so impressive is every person was in action in something in their domain. They were doing good, they were making a difference, they were using their energy. And the thing that I've learned is we all live in our own lives that are very stressful, they're very busy, and they're very complex. The place that we have to remember is to step out of the lives that we're faced with today and the challenges and help someone else. And in helping someone else, the things around us also become easier. And so as you think about how your commitment to all in is, what you're willing to do, the spaces you're willing to step into, how you're willing to show up every day, I squat, I would do one more sit-up. Because the one more I could do in the moment, but over the course of time, it was going to make me an Olympian, and it did, a 2-time Olympian. As we reflected on the one more, we've created this idea that what happens if we all do one more thing in our life? What happens if you invited one more person here? If you made one more phone call to someone, if you gave one more person a stretch project, if you put one more person in a boardroom, if you do one more thing, which almost takes no time from you, it will create dramatic change for the people around you. So I challenge you to think about how you do one more thing for one other person that is around you, that opens a door they will never be able to open themselves. And then you encourage and support them completely in the things that they can do and what they can accomplish. And when we do that with opportunity, and then we're willing to be a disruptor, we will create great things as a community and as individuals. And for me, that's how I define all in. And that's what I want for all of us to do collectively, is to step in that space so that we make a difference and leave a legacy, and the world is better because we were here. Thank you.